Superhero fiction is weird. It's an entire genre characterized by telling stories with no real endings. All the communicated themes and imagination perpetually exist in the second act because we've become so accustomed with these big characters existing in such a long temporal horizon that for stories to convey meaning, complete their explorations, or even give us closure, it never needs to come at the cost of breaking that long chain of consistent development. There's obviously comics that tackle what an ending would be like. Spider-Man Reign is my personal favorite. Oh my god, this comic is so sad. The recent Avengers Endgame would fit into this category, but a chunk of modern popular fiction, especially franchises, can be identifiably marked by this etiquette, where the story constantly resets itself for the next artist's injection of imagination and interpretation. It's both a robust artistic and business model. Every executive nowadays in film wants a shared universe because everybody wants a franchise with no end to them, just more sequels, and superhero properties are a goldmine.
He's like, I got some directives for you if you're going to move forward on the process. Some things I want you to do and don't in the script. He's going, 3 things. Okay, I said, all right. He's going, 1, I don't want to see him in that suit. 2, I don't want to see him fly. And 3, he's got to fight a giant spider in the 3rd act.
That clip of Kevin Smith from years ago talking about John Peters to me is the ultimate delineation between the pre-MCU era of superhero films and the current Kevin Feige era, which is that nowadays people who make superhero films aren't aliens to the culture, but they're actually nerds.
And I looked back on my favorite film series, and the ones I loved the most were the ones that did unique things in Part 3. Even The Search for Spock, led a new, deep in the mythology of Trek, which led directly to The Voyage Home. We could do a whole interview about Star Trek if you want.
It reminds me of that episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, when they accidentally create Professor Moriarty.
If there's one thing that the MCU have done incredibly well over the last 10 years is that, artistically, they've transported the same paradigm of reinterpretability from their comic origins into film. Each MCU film freely deconstructs and reconstructs characters despite being played by the same actors and inhabiting the same strong continuity, in a way that is so specific to superhero storytelling that it's become impossible to replicate elsewhere. Memory is an important aspect of consuming superhero stories because satisfying intertextuality is a key language that the entire genre uses to communicate with the audience. Each character draws upon an unbroken but flexible history that gives even the smallest reference a provocative emotional feeling. Just seeing Captain Marvel's logo at the end of Infinity War, even if you don't know who it is, makes you excited from the possibilities. It's a form of storytelling language that we've sort of developed now. As Emily Kitely and Michael Pickering argued, imagination is dependent on memory. They are indissoluble because imagination is a transaction between time. When you read a book, you use your memories to materialize the words, and comics exist in a similar interstitial space because every character encompasses their own long histories, and as a result, every character is basically a connection between 2 points in time. The Captain America trilogy is the most overt in the way that it portrays a man living through history, but even the Iron Man trilogy kind of subtly has the same artistic process, in the way it depicts a character that's very reflective of a mood from the 1960s and 70s.
So I thought, I'm gonna get a guy who makes munitions, and I'll make him a real industrialist. And something the kids would hate, the military-industrial something, complex.
In each film, each stage that the character goes through reflects the changing nuances of this archetypical discussion, from questions of moral identities, the right to ownership, and the culture of fear.
What do you want from me?
Nothing, sir. I just needed a reason to kill you that would play well on TV.
The assembly of new meaning through old pieces is essential to crafting superhero stories. Everything exists thematically independently, but still contribute in building something that is effectively a tessellation of meaning. Everyone can have their own different interpretations, but it's still collectively understandable. The Thor trilogy is easily the most overt example of this. Unlike the Iron Man trilogy or the Captain America trilogy, Thor's entire collection of 3 films are helmed independently with 3 completely different directors. Therefore, each film readapts a character in completely different tones, genres, and conceptual focuses, despite being sequels to each other. The first Thor film by Kenneth Branagh unsurprisingly plays the origins of Thor as a Shakespearean drama about the opera of a man growing. Thor Dark World by Alan Taylor strives for the genre identity of being a giant high fantasy epic about love, redemption, and Armageddon and politics. It has a really strong script that is directed with minimum effort, because it's Alan Taylor, the guy who directed Terminator Genesis. But regardless, it's a different take. Thor Ragnarok is a complete tonal reinvention. It's a Taika Waititi film first and an epic fantasy superhero sci-fi epic second. And it has its very specific stamps of being a farcical comedy that has a real ounce of subtle sadness woven into the delivery of every laughter. If you treat this trilogy like a traditional trilogy of films, then it just doesn't work because there's no thematized pattern. Each film doesn't hold itself in continuing an arc, but picks and chooses what it wants to deal with for the purpose for their own independent imagination. This happens to the point that each film has some sort of ending that leaves a serious dangling thread, usually for an Avengers film, or is just casually discarded in the next one.
No. Thank you.
Oh shit.
My son Thor has returned. Greetings, my boy.
But that's the fascinating dimension, is that each film functions and treats itself like a different comic book run. The imprints of different storytellers is more important than the traditional conventions of dramatic consistency or cohesiveness. The character of Thor on film, like many of the other MCU characters, becomes a mosaic of varying artistic imprints. Wow, that is really pretentious. Endgame is an example of the other extreme. Its entire creative construction is built on its ability to connect to itself through this mosaic. It's not just Avengers 4 as in it draws upon the established ideas and momentums of Avengers 1, 2 and 3, instead it builds its entire premise on an idea from the Ant-Man films, the quantum realm. The entire Time Heist storyline is only possible because it revisits and mines upon a chain of 21 films worth of individual stories, themes and characters. It is structured almost like a comic book event that draws upon the memories from not just one long temporal horizon, but multiple chains of memories. Something as simple as seeing Alexander Pierce shaking hands with Tony Stark, bridging the gap between Avengers with the Winter Soldier, or seeing Steve getting to dance with Peggy, or finally seeing a moment between Tony and his father again. The shared connective tissue is in itself the valuable content that the film explores. It's a film that you can't structurally judge by traditional filmic qualifications of quality because it's a completely new type of filmic storytelling that translates a characteristic and storytelling relationship from one medium into another. Its artistry and craft comes from an intensely fluid intertextual relationship that the audience is actively aware of. Each MCU film can choose to strengthen its continuity or relax it for the purpose of its own imaginative craftsmanship, while all contributing to a single odyssey. It's something that even the James Bond movie doesn't do. The MCU, with this perpetual, never-ending, interconnected anthology-like creative universe, has spanned across over 10 years, which meant I was 11 years old when Iron Man 1 came out. Everyone has their own stories during these 10 years of the brand. It's a form of global cosmopolitan memory, as Levi and Snyder, we've gone to so many places and seen the characters do so much that they all feel oddly intimate. The exact same ongoing, unbroken, uninterrupted, longitudinal love for these characters that exists within the comic medium has completely transmitted into the art of filmmaking. They are a new form of shared memory that is reliant on this collective, imaginative, ongoing process that never ends, that never needs to end.
Just pull off that band-aid, you lost.
The power of mnemonic collective imagination created by transnational brands is the strange new world we live in, and is a strange epochal process. The MCU isn't perfect, there's a ton of blemishes, and it suffers from a pretty inconsistent quality line. Thankfully there's no dreadful films, but it's certainly one of the most interesting postmodern huge creative edifices. It melds the characteristics of two different mediums into a new form of storytelling marked by this lovely sincere love for a set of formerly obscure characters. I remember coming out of Endgame genuinely shocked that the business executives at Disney allowed this film to be made. This $500 million 3-hour-long comic book continuity loving creative bubble where so much of its creative enjoyment will be inaccessible to a wide audience that isn't part of that cosmopolitan memory, that collective imagination. It's really quite amazing, and it made me realize that when it's over, when Marvel finally makes a movie that bombs or something else happens to come along to snatch everyone's attention, I don't know, maybe when they start beaming reality TV into cinemas or something, this weird pop culture pantheon of imagination really was the best ride. I'm gonna cash my check from Disney now.